So we're going to do, that's kind of always how it started, but I'm going to try something different tonight. So we're going to do a recap. It's really important when we're going through a whole book like we are right now to keep all the themes in the forefront of our mind so we can like keep that in context when we're looking at it. Thank you. I'm sorry. And so, same question as always. What have we learned about so far? What are the key themes that we've learned about? I'm going to write them on the board so you can look at them while we're reading, if anything comes to mind while we're reading.
It was a letter to the Jews.
Right, Jewish Christians. Okay, and what kind of situation were they in?
They're kind of being excluded and not like held as a higher at the same standard that the other Roman citizens were.
Yeah, they were being persecuted. That's a big thing. I mean, most Christians were at this point. Sick. Ah, this is a bad idea. I have to spell it. Okay, so they were being persecuted, and so all the trials and all the things that come with that, and being impoverished because of persecution. What else did we talk about? What are some more chapter 1 things?
Doers of the word, not just
Right,
hearers.
yeah, doers of the word. And along with that, it's the faith plus works that we see in chapter 2. And how you can't have faith apart from works because it's basically dead faith. Okay, what else?
Partiality.
Partiality, that's right. And so a bunch of the richer Christians were being kind of brought to a higher standard. They were being put in places of honor as opposed to the poor Christians. And so a big portion of this book is telling them that, you know, all of us are equal. We're all children of God, and that's what we should be measured by, and not by the standard of the world. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, what did we talk about last time?
The tongue.
Right, control over the tongue. So that was one of the main points that also got added last week that we're going to see again, I think, this week. Don't laugh at me. I had to look up how to spell tongue just in case I did this tonight. Which is really sad. I'm a college student. Oh, and we're forgetting a big one. It kind of deals with the Jewish persecution, but it's trials and how we ought to have perseverance in the trials because God can use those trials. Good grief. Is my handwriting okay? You're gonna make fun of me? Okay. I think that's everything I have here. Yeah. There are, of course, a few other things, but that's the main stuff. Just getting that out of the way. We've got all the main pictures. So keep in mind when we're reading scripture tonight, this is going to be in our, just like the corner of the back of our mind, because all the things that we're going to deal with are going to have these key themes in them. So now that we're into the actual stuff, I want to start off with a question, some fun stuff to get started with. But have you ever wanted or done something despite everything else or every warning sign telling you it was a bad idea? That's kind of a broad question. So have you ever wanted something or wanted to do something despite everything telling you that it's a bad idea and that it's no?
Yeah,
Sure enough.
Can you give me some like fun examples?
Fun.
What's that? I don't know. Like we've all got stories.
Jumping off a cliff,
Jumping off a cliff? You jumped off the cliff?
like 75 foot. I haven't told you that story.
There you go.
Every time, it's like every couple of months, there's this new story that comes out. It's all the dad lore.
Sure.
All the dad lore. That's fun. So who else?
Actually, mine was the same thing.
Jumping off a cliff?
Yeah.
Why is that a common theme?
I was in college.
Were you Katie, perhaps?
I was with LCU, it was fish camp.
There's no. What you got?
Jumping out of an airplane.
There's a lot of jumping. Okay. Jumping out of an airplane. Okay. Okay, how about like wanted something? Like there's something that you really, really wanted despite like, it might cost too much and it's not a good purchase, but you bought it anyways, and you kind of have to deal with that.
An Xbox.
An Xbox, you're so right, and I need to work with that because it's a waste of time. Okay. What else?
I feel like every time I go to TJ Maxx, I convince myself that I need like all of these things, and then I just never use them. Like a yoga mat, I've used it like 3 times, but I convinced myself I needed it, and people told me not to get it. I still got it.
Can I out you?
Sure.
A lot of the time, I'm the voice of reason for Sam her purchases. So,
Same thing I would do.
yeah.
Trip.
So one that we have a dog in the family. His name's Tux. He's a golden doodle, and so he's like almost a person. Like you can tell by his eyes that he is like conscious. And what's the word that Cody uses? We talked about children.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Very good.
Sentient.
Oh yes, my dog is sentient. He has thought. And so every time when we go to dinner,
Google that one too.
so every time we have dinner at my family, we all sit around the table, and Tux likes to sit between me and my sister, so on opposite sides of the table, and he likes to get pets. But when he's doing this, you can always see where his eyes are looking, and it's at the table. And so he's always looking at the table, looking for the chance to get some food. And so my parents are really, they're not bad. They're good at telling him no. It's like, no, you can't be here, you're going to eat something. And so he'll just move to the other side and he'll rotate. But everything in him is fighting all these desires are coming to this one point of, I want this food now. And so that, is also a desire that he has when we're gone. And so Tux has eaten everything. Let's think. Soap bottles, a loofah, a battery,
Still alive.
my wallet twice.
Yes.
And
Y'all have
so,
some pretty high vet bills, or?
yeah, he's
That's his fault.
so he's a destructive dog, but everything in these moments points him to this one thing of the want that he has in the moment. And it's almost like instantaneously, like it snaps, like once he has it, and he's like, oh shoot, I just did that. And so when you come home, he's like hiding. It's the funniest thing watching him be scared, because he'll wag his tail real big, and he's like, I haven't done anything bad, and so he tries to hide it, and he starts freaking out. All that goes to say that all of his desires at that one point were waging war within him. And so he's trying to fight the should I not. It's like a kid trying to touch a stove, even though their parents have told them no. And so all those things culminated, despite him saying, or despite, not him saying, he's a dog, despite him thinking that, it's a bad idea. And so James 4 talks a lot about how our desires can wage war within us. And sometimes what we want most isn't what's best for us. And so when our desires are out of order, they lead to conflict, frustration, and even separation from God. So how do we keep those desires in check? That's kind of one of the main points that we'll talk about tonight. And James chapter 4 is great. I had a really hard time writing this, because I think I could probably spend a 4-week series of chapter 4. There's just a lot of powerful things to say here. So like always, we're going to read the chapter. I'll ask you what stands out to you, and then we'll unpack it. So now that you're here, Dad, I was definitely stalling for him, but it's all good. Can you read chapter 4 again, please?
Sure. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly, to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says, he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us, but he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town, spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
Thank you. So I'll give you all a minute. What stands out to you?
Our desires get us in trouble.
The part where it says, if you're a friend of the world, you're an enemy of God.
That's powerful, man.
Yeah.
What else?
The scripture part that says God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much easier said than done to humble oneself, that's for sure.
Yeah. And we'll talk about a little bit tonight what that looks like. But yeah, it is hard to humble yourself. I think sometimes it's even harder to realize that you're a proud person.
Yeah.
Like that's the first step, is realizing that you're a proud person and wanting to change that. And sometimes that hurts more than trying to humble yourself.
Submit yourself to God.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about washing your hands.
Mm-hmm. That's a verse that we hear a lot, I think. You know, submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. That's such a good verse. It makes sense why it's quoted so much. So in studying for this, the thing that caught my eye was the last verse. I had to highlight it. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. That's such a call out, I think, to a lot of people. But it's crazy. So let me ask you another question. We've got all the fill of it. What are the main pieces of this? Like, what are the main topics of this chapter? And then how do they fit into the rest of the book as a whole? Or how do they fit in together? Because they do kind of have a common theme.
I think the common theme is submit yourself to God.
Right, yeah.
Don't judge others.
Mm-hmm. Don't judging others.
And being doers of the word.
Right.
It's about heart, not about
Mm-hmm.
outward but inward.
Yes. That kind of ties into what she was saying. So yeah, we've kind of got three main issues that James is writing in this chapter about. And so it's worldliness, being a friend of the world, and then the double-mindedness that comes with, following God and then being a follower of the world, being a friend of the world. And those things kind of like tying and pulling at each other. And then I would probably split it up to, again, verse 11 and 12 as its own section. And it's, again, readdressing the controlling of the tongue and, the root of that problem. And then finally, it's verses 13 until the end of the chapter and planning for the future and how, these people were being arrogant and planning for the future. And so he kind of already said it, but it's the kind of things that tie these things together. What they all have in common is that something else is taking the place of God. Something else is steering your life that's not God. And so worldliness, if you're being a friend of the world, that desire is going to try and draw you towards the world and steering you away from God. A root of the tongue, and judging others, is steering how you talk judging the law of Christ, it's steering you in another direction. And then planning for the future, that's quite literally steering the direction of your life in the future. And so all of these things take the place of God. So let's dive in. Can someone read verse 1?
What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you?
So this is crazy. It's such a good verse, and it really is kind of the thing. It's like, what is the main point? What we're actually dealing with here? And so, I have a marker here. So if we're all kind of looking at all of these things, what they all have in common is desire. And so all of the desires that they're facing are kind of pulling into this. Because, you can think about it, being doers of the word, not faith only. You're wanting to, by just having faith, you're wanting to look and appear as if you know what you're doing, but really you don't have the effort, you don't desire to do the work behind that faith. And if you're showing partiality, you're looking to get something from somebody by showing them partiality. By not controlling your tongue, you're looking to burn someone down, as we looked at in chapter 3, by starting a wildfire. And then perseverance, I think we've talked about that a little bit, but the desire to stop. Just be tired to be done, and then just draw away from Christ when enduring perseverance. And so all the things that we're dealing with is all the desires that we feel, all the things that we want in life. And they're all at war with each other. Our desire to be one with God, to walk the path with God. It's struggling with all of these things that we're dealing with, and it's quite a great analogy of this war, of everything is going to battle, everything is conflicting with each other, it's all in tension. And so all this back and forth, all this tension, it really does bring a new light to the meaning of the word double-minded. Wouldn't you agree? Because, double-mindedness is everything fighting for the place that's center of the throne, that has the wheel to your heart, that's steering where you're going next. I'm in chat class right now. It's Christian history and theology, and my professor loves this church father, but his name's St. Augustine. And he writes this book called The Confessions. I've been trying to get Sam to read it with me. If you've never read Confessions before, it's amazing. But basically, the point of this dude's book is to kind of write down where his heart's been at in the entirety of his life. But if you don't know anything about St. Augustine, he's one of the probably greatest thinkers in philosophy ever. It's kind of crazy. Just how much of a genius he is. And so the way he thinks about how we work, it's kind of in tension with another point that we have. There's this line, his name's Descartes, it's a famous philosopher, but it's the I think, therefore I am. We've heard this before. Augustine would disagree with this. He'd say that you're not just the thoughts, but more so, you're the desires that are within you. And so everything that you have is fighting, so you're just the desires are what makes you a person. It's what you want. And you'll do anything in your power to get what you desire. And we have all these desires, and including serving God is one of them. And so it's only when we order these desires with God first that we're able to have the pure heart. And we get all of these desires in check, and they all flow toward God. Towards God is when we have a pure heart. So I'd like to read a thing for you, just a section of this book. It's really interesting. It talks about sin in a different way. So if we think about sin as desire of wanting something, it starts out as good. It starts out as a good desire. So I'll start with reading this. I'll read a sentence from this. For in every vice there lurks a counterfeit beauty. Pride, for instance, even pride apes sublimity. Wherever you are the only God, most high, above all things. As for ambition, what does it crave but honor and glory, while you are worthy of honor beyond all others, and eternally glorious? The ferocity of men aims to inspire fear, but who is to be feared except the one God? Can anything be snatched from his power, withdrawn from it? When or where or whither or by whom? Flirtatiousness aims to arouse love by its charming wiles, but nothing can hold more charm than your charity, God's charity. Nor can anything be loved to greater profit than your truth, which outshines all else in its luminous beauty. And so he kind of thinks about all these sins as it's just desires that have been corrupted and they've turned to sinful nature. And so he finishes this kind of section with, sadness pines at the loss of good things with which greed took its pleasure, because it wants to be like you, for whom nothing can be taken away. A soul that turns away from you, therefore, lapses into fornication, when it seeks apart from you what it can never find in pure and limpid form except by returning to you. All those who wander far away and set themselves up against you are imitating you. But in a perverse way, yet by this mimicry, they proclaim that you are creator of the whole of nature, and that in consequence there is no place whither we can hide from your presence. And so it's all of these desires have been corrupted when we think of them. And so all of these things have good intentions. They started as wanting good things, and they turn corrupted. You know, and Paul talks about this too, in one of the famous chapters of the book of Romans. Turn to it. It's Romans 7. We've probably all heard this before. But starting in verse 14. Yeah. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am in the flesh, sold under sin. For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. And if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, and that is my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now if I do not do what I want, this is a lot of words. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind, and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in its member. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind, with my flesh I serve the law of sin. And so we've got all these great thinkers agreeing with this, of all of our desires are clashing, the desires of the flesh and sin, and the wanting to serve God and the law of God, and they're all at war with each other. And that leaks out into all the rest of our things. And so first and foremost, our main problem is that we're waging a war within ourselves, and that leaks out into the rest of the world. So can someone read verses 12 through 3, or 2 through 3?
You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. So obviously, he's talking to people who their corrupted desires are winning this fight. They're winning this fight for the steering wheel of their lives. And it's crazy because they want all of these things, but they turn to the most devious ways to get them. And I mean, it says in verse, I think it's 3. Yeah, it's 2, that you don't have it because you're not asking for it. And it's kind of this thing of like, I've never thought to ask for it, and so I'm going to take any way that I can see possible to gain those things. I mean, have you ever had that feeling before where you're like sitting in front of somebody and you want something from them, or you want them to say something, like maybe it's your birthday, nobody's saying happy birthday, but you don't let them know that it's your birthday? Like, it's kind of thing is like, you don't let them know what you want.
It's like this kind of situation. How can you do this if you're not asking for it? And so my version doesn't say God, but that makes more sense. I kind of took it the way of these people who were poor were asking all of these, they're showing partiality to the rich people, and all they had to do was ask them for it, and they would definitely give it to them, because it's the godly thing to do. But I mean, it turns to God, and it echoes, and this thing of like, you ask and you do not receive because you ask to spend it on your passions. And that kind of echoes chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Let me get there. It's another thing we talked about. It's, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So they're asking for the wrong reasons. And so we get this picture of like, we're trying to get these things, and when we ask God for them, we're not asking for the right reasons. And so my question to you is, how many times have you asked God for the right things, but because it's not for the right reasons, it hasn't gone the way that it should have?
You don't get it because it's not aligned with God's will.
Do you? I mean, but like there's some things like I prayed, I'll say this, like I prayed to God for a friend or something like this, or like a girlfriend. I prayed for a girlfriend for so long. This isn't you, Sam. I'm sorry. Because I was lonely and I wanted something, to take the place of feeling that loneliness. And so it wasn't kind of a thing with God where it's like, God, can I have this holy relationship so that we can bless you together and worship you together? And it was, no, I'm trying to do this for my own selfish reasons to fulfill that. And so when I was doing that, when I was looking for these relationships, I mean, they didn't go anywhere because I was looking for selfish, ungodly reasons for them. And so they're doing the same thing. They're asking God, but for the wrong reasons.
That has to do with like covetousness, and that's how like that desires and like sin begins, because your eyes will look for the things that you want.
Right.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's why it says like, if your eye causes you to sin, like pluck it out.
For sure. I mean, it says that in verse 2, like you desire what you don't have, and so you murder. And that's like the worst thing you could possibly do. I don't think these Christians were actually murdering. I think that's just like the most like grievous thing that could happen, because eventually, like, if you want something and you're going to do everything to get it, you're going to have to murder somebody to get it, because I mean they won't give it to you. So it's like this worst case scenario. So can someone read verse 4 for me?
You adulterous people, don't you know the friendship with the world means enemy against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God.
And so if we ask for the wrong things for the wrong reasons, we're being a friend with the world. In verse 4, he uses the phrase adulterous people. And they wouldn't know what that means in context, but that's the phrase that God would use when using the prophets to speak, to talk about Israel. They were the people that were turning from God to do all of these selfish things like idol worship and sacrifice and all of those things. And so he's putting them on the same thing of like, you're turning away from God. You're adulterous people. And so he says, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Well, what is enmity? In the New Testament, this word is used for two things. It means opposition or even hatred. And so that's powerful if you think about it. Like, if friendship with the world is what it costs, then that means that you're being hateful towards God. You're being at war with God. It's like the prodigal son wishing his father dead to get his inheritance. So it's hating God, but wanting the things that he can give you. Like, how powerful, what a big cautionary tale for that. We have to think about that. But I want to bring it back into context, because we use that phrase, a friend of the world, and that looks different for us today. But I think it did look a little bit different for the people in that time. So what did being a friend of the world look like in times of someone who's being persecuted?
I think it might have at least partially idolatry worship involved in it, or at least like eating the meat sacrificed by idols, or stuff like that.
That's something that a lot of the New Testament letters are talk about. It's like, don't partake in anything that's been ritually sacrificed, because we want to be separated from how the pagans worship. How would it look like in normal life? I mean, that's kind of part of it.
Someone who's popular,
Go into detail about that. What does that mean?
like somebody that everybody likes.
Oh, I see. So like having popularity, like being a person who is rich and who is like in this context.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that. Yeah. So it's having that popularity of people liking you in the pagan world. So yeah, it's all these normal life. It's trying to hide being a Christian in this time, trying to hide all of their faith. So having a dead faith with no works, it makes you look nothing like a Christian at that time and everything like a pagan in that world. But especially as part of the torture, it's kind of interesting. But the way that torture and like persecution worked in this time, it's a really weird thing. But there's this letter between two Roman officials, and they're like, hey, I don't know why we're persecuting Christians. So what do I do with them? And then this guy answers like, yeah, if you get a Christian in that's been convicted, make him try and confess, torture him, do whatever you need. And if he confesses, if he renounces his faith, he's good to go. And it's kind of weird, like, all you had to do was renounce your faith. Like, you said, everything that I thought is a lie, and then you could be freed. And so a bunch of these people were just renouncing their faith. They were being freed from all of their commitments to being a Christian, and then they'd just go about their life and they'd come back to the church. They'd lie to the group. And it's kind of like Peter denying Jesus. It's denying him when in the moment of at a moment of trial, and then coming back after that. And so being a friend of the world is lying one moment and then coming back the next.
Or what do they call this? On the fence or like lukewarm?
Do what?
It's called like being on the fence or like lukewarm, where you're not all the way one or all the way the other.
Yeah, I mean they're basically fighting for their life. They were afraid that God, they were afraid for martyrdom. Basically, it's a weird thing, but it's a really important thing back then. It was tossing your faith away for 1 second and picking it back up when it suits you best. So yeah, it would be lukewarmness. So we're going to go to the next section. Can someone read verses 5 through 6?
Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit he has caused to dwell in us? But give us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble.
Yeah, so he's very protective of us. Of course he wants our love. But also, he's a jealous God, and he's going to let you choose. So he's giving you basically an ultimatum of saying you can either be a friend of the world or you can be with me. And his grace extends to those who humble themselves. It's grace to those who might struggle every once in a while with worldliness, but then come back to him ultimately. Yeah, we're going to try and move on because I'm going slow. So can someone read verses 7 through 8?
Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded.
So, we asked the question earlier about how do we humble ourselves. And I think that the order of verse 7 is really, really crucial. Because the devil will only flee from you after you resist him. And we can only resist him when we turn to God. And so it's that repentance that spurts forward all of these things, but it's drawing near to God first. That's the first major step. It's if we decide to turn away from all of the worldliness, we have to fill it with something else. And so you draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. It's like a repudiating kind of cycle of like, if you go towards this, if you draw near to God, he'll draw near to you, and you'll flee from the devil will flee from you because you're resisting him, because you have all of these things. And so it's a never-ending cycle of godliness. And so we get also here a ritual cleansing metaphor. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts. And so it's kind of an inside and outside cleansing. Jesus told us to cleanse our hearts, but really cleansing your hands and washing your hands is for ritual purity in the Jewish culture. And so here he's saying you can't put clean water in a dirty cup. Like, in order to be clean and to be pure, you have to, and draw near towards God, you have to empty, you have to cleanse yourself. You have to make yourself pure. And so that's part of the thing of like ordering your desires, of making sure that God is the seat in your heart. So can someone read verses 9 through 10?
Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor.
So yeah, this is a situation where, if you're feeling convicted, then you're in the right place. This is the exact thing that James is trying to get at. Yeah.
It's hard to humble yourself, though.
For real.
Yeah.
I used to have like a really short temper,
Mhm.
and like the more I tried to humble myself, like people would like say things that made me mad, or do things that made me mad, or they would intentionally do things that they knew I didn't like to make me mad. You know what I mean? And it constantly happened until I was, this is impossible.
Right. I mean, and the only advice I can give to you is draw near to God and he'll draw near to you. I mean, it's this verse right in front of it is, you can't.
And verse 7, right before that, talking about submit, the order is like submit yourself to God, and then you can resist the devil and flee from you, and then draw near to God as well.
So yeah, you'd have to
submission is important.
Like let that anger go and give it to God, or else you keep hanging on to it. You're gonna keep getting mad.
I mean, yeah. It doesn't say here that it's going to be an easy process at all.
Oh no, I never said that.
Yeah.
Never.
The Bible never says it's
It never says it's gonna be a cakewalk.
And all these things he's talking about, desires, your personal desires, and basically he's talking about you covet so you can go to murder, like you were saying earlier, like they want something, so instead of asking for it, they're trying to figure out how they can get it by whatever means necessary, right? So when you're submitting to somebody, you're putting them as your master, right? And so what he's saying at that point is like, instead of trying to go after things in your own way to please yourself and your own desires and things like that, you're gonna submit yourself to God first and want to do what he wants his desires are and not your desires.
Mm-hmm.
And then draw close to him after that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's the my plan for my life kind of thing versus the God's plan for my life kind of thing. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, that's right. So we'll get to a new section. Can someone please read verses 11 through 12?
Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?
And so judging, another word that's used here in some translations is slander. But basically that means is like bringing someone down, it's finding faults, it's gossiping with the intention to harm someone. And so I've heard a lot of people also use this like, don't judge me, like I'm doing my own thing. It does not mean that you can't call out or that you shouldn't call out someone that's in their sin, because James is literally doing that right now. That's what this letter is about. He calls them adulteresses, which is kind of like an insult to them. But he's doing it out of love. And that's the thing is, as long as it's out of love, you call out sins, because it's in that love and not the bringing someone down that matters. But also here we get also this law motif that's been going on of, the law of liberty, which is in Christ, and all the things apart with that. And it ties in chapter 3 too of, I said that, yeah. Judging the law of liberty that is set in place by Christ. And so he's saying here you can't be a judge making your own law, basically. You can't be your own person deciding how you ought to live, how ought things to be, and be a doer of Christ's law at the same time. And it says there's only one true judge, and it's the one who passed judgment on sin and death. It's Jesus Christ. It kind of gives this little diss at the end, but who are you compared to him? Like, who are you to judge your neighbor? And so it's putting these people basically in their place of like, listen, you shouldn't be doing this because you're kind of superseding Jesus in this moment. So can someone read verses 13 through 14?
Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why you do not even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that.
So yeah, this kind of feels kind of odd, out of place. Because we're talking about, worldliness, and, being a judge means that, you're taking into account your law instead of Jesus, and, choosing a side on that. And it's like, now don't plan for the future. Just kind of go about your day moment by moment. And that's not what it means. I struggled with that a lot as a teenager. Like, is it like anytime I'm trying to make a plan with my friends, do I say, yeah, if the Lord wills it, do you want to have a sleepover on Wednesday? Like, no, that's not what it means. You shouldn't say that every time you're making a plan about the future. Well, basically, this was most likely written to wealthy merchants. It's a big thing to make plans about the future. It was just part of the thing, just normal everyday economic life and things. But here, God's trying to remind these people of life is temporary. You can't control as much of life as you think you can, or as much as you want to. My Bible had a really nice note. It said, planning and investing aren't wrong. Arrogant self-confidence and boasting are. And so what this means is like, if you think that you have your plans figured out for the future, and you know exactly what you're going to do and it's going to go right the way, because you know it's going to be, because you're confident in yourself and how it's going to work, like, no, that's not going to work. And so in verse 15, it goes on and say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this and do that. And so what it's saying is that, you should have the Lord's will in mind when you're making your plans. Every business decision must be based on submission to God's will. I'd like to add on to that. Every decision that you make should be based on to God's will. And so he's asking these Christians, he's kind of encouraging them, are you doing that? Do you have your everyday's decision in mind with God's will? Can someone read verse 16 for me?
16?
Yes.
As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil.
So here he's just flat out saying, it's like if you want to make your name, a name for yourself, if you want to be well known, if you want to be liked, if you're living in that and you take pride and that's your identity, that's guided by evil. That's not God's will for your life. It's kind of powerful thinking because, like, if you want to be excellent at something, but you can't, it's kind of this fine line of, I want to be excellent for God and not because it makes me feel good because I'm getting all this accomplishment and accolades and all of the pride that comes with that. Like, no, that's the corrupted desire taking fruit. And so we finally get, it's kind of verse 17. It's beautiful. I highlighted it. It's just a one-liner that works. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And so it's crazy to think about just like what that means in relation to our lives. But he's basically saying you've been taught the right thing, so go do it. True religion is taking care of widows and orphans and straying from worldliness. Go do that. And so God's will, he's also saying kind of twofold, is that you know what God's will is. Like, you have to draw near to God and he'll draw near to you.
That's why it says the teachers are held more accountable.
Right, yeah. Because you've been taught with, and so they were already fighting, right? Like, bringing that to chapter 3, is they were doing the wrong things. And they knew they were doing the wrong things. And that's a sin. Like, it was outright a sin. And so he's challenging them with this verse. But he's also taking this into context of the last couple of verses. If you know God's will, if you know what you ought to do because God's leading you in that direction, it's going to be far greater than your own. I think it's an easy to say. If God's plan for your life is so much more instrumental and so much far greater and far more beautiful than your life, than your own. Because we're so short-sighted. And so our plan for our life is selfish. But God's plan for our life, if we're doing the right thing, and we know that we ought to do it. God's plan is knowing that we know what to do the right thing, and it's taking care of others. And so God's plan has to take into account others into that. So it's far greater than our own. So we've reached the last end of this chapter. So I've got 3 key takeaways that we can apply to this. So the first one, they're all questions, but the first one is this. Are your desires ordered? Do you have God sitting at the front, the steering wheel of your goal? And so I want to ask you, think about your biggest goals or desires right now. Do they align with what God wants for you? Are they drawing you closer to Him, or are they pulling you away? It's part of that. Our desires are different. And like I said earlier, talking about Augustine, our desires start out as good and they can get corrupted. So what is the difference in having a desire and then letting that desire control where you live, control you? What are some signs that maybe a desire is controlling you?
Think about it too much, is that going to be like idolatry?
That's so
'Cause
profound.
you're-
Yeah.
You're,
If there's a
worshiping it basically.
Yes, if there is something that is eating away at your mind, that's idolatry. If it's taking the center of your mind, it's definitely pulling you away from God. It's causing you to worry or even obsess over something.
And spending all that time that you should be spending with God.
And sometimes even, good things can become sins and become idols and stumbling blocks for us. It's the deal. My second question is, are you a friend of the world? So we live in a very, very culturally Christian world, free from persecution. There's not a lot of persecution that goes on, aside from angry words with another person, but you can always go back to your big group of people, your church home, and feel safe again. And it's so easy to blend in. There's sometimes when the Christian world is so blurred, like the difference, the bridge between the Christian world and the pagan world, as the worldly world is so blurred that sometimes you can't even see the difference. It all looks the same.
I think I deal with some of that because I still identify as a Catholic, and people don't like that.
I don't think we can talk about that later, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that.
I think it's I don't know if they look the same or it's blurred, it gets skewed, I think.
Mhm.
I think that our vision gets bad. And so then we think it's close and we think it's similar, but you wind up one day looking where your life is and you're like, you never would have jumped from point A to point B, but all of a sudden you're at point B and you're like, how did I get here? I would not, if you asked me this, it's like putting a frog in boiling water, right? You put a frog in hot water, in boiling water, he's going to jump straight out. You put him in cold water and you turn up the heat and he'll stay in there until he boils again. It's just, that's what happens to us.
There's this beautiful story in all 4 Gospels where there's this dude and he sees Jesus out on the water. And he's like, I see Jesus, I'm going to go be with him, I'm going to walk straight towards him. And so he starts walking, his eyes are straight on Jesus. And then he sees the world, his vision gets blurry, it's stormy, it's raining, he forgets where he was. He remembers now, I'm in the middle of the water, I'm sinking, I'm drowning. Oh, Jesus pulls me up. And so it's the thing of we can get so blurred by our surroundings that we take our eyes off of Jesus and stop walking straight towards him and start sinking. Yeah, that's good.
I think too, when you look at it like it's boxes you need to check to become a Christian or just become more Christ-like, and that's probably, it is a recipe for failure because it starts with, you actually gotta want it, really want to be with the Lord, want to give yourself to the Lord, want to know more of the Word, want to put more of the Word in your life, want to be more Christ-like, than just thinking that it's boxes you have to check, and if I get all these boxes checked, well, I'm a Christian, or I'm going to be more Christ-like, or people are going to see me as a Christian man. Because if you go about it that way, it's going to be fail.
Right, yeah.
Big
So it's
fail.
that.
Yeah.
It's that appear. It's like look. So that.
Well, it
that
looks
point,
like you're a Christian, in when all you're doing is.
It's just an appearance. Yeah.
It's a real legalistic way of taking it. It's no good.
Mm-hmm.
Those people were called Nicolaitans in the Bible.
Which means what?
The false Christians.
Oh.
So yeah, and so my kind of answer to that is you can tell kind of by the way that things are looking, but ultimately, it's the fruits from, is God the one that you're looking for? If it's the relationship, if it's walking towards God, or is it something else? If it's the desire that's, taking the seat of your heart. I've kind of said that over and over again tonight.
You can't set the expectations that you're gonna bat 1,000 either. If you think
Yeah.
that too, if you think every day I'm gonna be like it's gonna be look like me walking in the light, and you have one day where you're not, and you're like, oh, that's a complete fail now. That's a bad way to move.
Yeah, I know, and then there's it's in here. There's grace. God exalts the humble, those who are willing to humble themselves. And so part of that humbling process is knowing when you've messed up and turning right around and walking back again, willing to get up again. So yeah, and so I'm going to leave you with this. It's one final thing. I'm out of time already, so I'll keep you again late tonight. So if you feel like right now that you're a friend of the world, that God is not the thing that's pointing you in the right, it's not steering your heart. There's hope. I want to bring you to Jeremiah 29. This section, it's written to the people in the exile of Judah. And you might have heard these verses before, but these people had been sinning. They turned so far away from God that God decided that he was going to give them into their sin for a while to discipline them. And this is kind of his hope for them. Starting in verse 11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you." It's my favorite Bible verse of all time. "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart." So this verse is the same thing that echoes James chapter 4. It's the draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Submit to him, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So maybe if you're not in that situation right now, there's no amount of distance from God, because in reality, when we say we're far from God, it's not a physical distance, how far away of God from we are. It's a moral thing. And so all it is just turning around, and he's right behind you. So that's the words that I'm going to end with tonight. So yeah, have a good night. Thank you all for coming again.
Thank you.